to find the product. That's our goal, is to multiply two integers to find the product. So set your notes up, and I think that you'll find today's lesson easier than adding and subtracting integers. The multiplication rules are a little simpler. And again, like we did with addition, we'll write the rule once, and then we will have a graphic to help memorize it and be brief. So the product of two positive numbers is always positive. The product of two negative numbers is also positive. And finally, the product of a positive and a negative multiplication problem will result in a negative answer. Whenever you're working with integers, whether it's multiplying, dividing, adding, or subtracting, you always need to keep track of the sign of the number, whether the number is positive or negative. So the product of a positive and negative number is negative. I'm going to continue to use green for positive and red for negative. I suggest that whichever colors you're using, you try to continue using the same colors. Unlike adding integers, we don't need to figure out which integer is bigger. That's what makes this a bit easier. Every time you multiply a positive and a negative number, the answer is always negative. We don't need to compare the two. So we don't worry, in this case, about the size of the circles. So a positive times a positive, here's our key, is always positive. A negative times a negative is also positive. A negative number times a positive number is a negative answer. And a positive number times a negative number will result in a negative answer. Example 1 is 5 times negative 4. So that's a positive times a negative. Parentheses mean multiplication when there's a number outside the parentheses. There's a number with no other symbols. I'm going to stop this here before I write the next one. This has been confusing for some people. But if there's a parenthesis right there, and there's a number right next to it, and there's nothing in between, there's no addition, subtraction, if the number's right next to it, it means multiplication. We don't need to have a multiplication sign. That's what we mean in math. So this is going to be -2 multiplied by -3. Two negative numbers multiplied together are going to result in a positive answer. And notice how even in my key I'm using the same parentheses, just to remind myself that that's multiplication. It still shows up. Sometimes you're going to see a multiplication sign, sometimes you're going to see a dot for multiplication, and sometimes you'll see parentheses. So -2 times -3 is 6. Now we'll use what you may be more familiar with, an x for multiplication. So -6 times -8 is a negative number times a negative number. And that's a positive result, positive product. Ten times 12 is a positive integer times a positive integer, so it'll have a positive answer. That'll be 120. Example 3 is -100 times a -2. We get a positive result of 200. And the last one, 16 times -5. Okay, I want to stop here and point out that even though the 16 is bigger than the 5, it has a greater absolute value, the answer is still negative. We don't compare the 16 with the 5 like we do in addition, and that may be confusing. But when we multiply, we just use this key. So we look up here, when we have one positive and one negative multiplied together, the answer is always negative. There's no need to compare. It's actually easier than when we add integers. So the result is -80. You can write a conclusion at the bottom. Put it in your own words if you'd like. You can write what you know is true about multiplying integers. And you can compare it to what I wrote.